For this countdown, we had to get really hands-on. First, we graciously and reverently omitted the mouse and keyboard, which, while dominating multiple genres for decades, didn't exactly fit with the model we had for this list. Our nominees were created by console developers, and their attempt to revolutionize each new generation. Reacquainting ourselves with each peculiar plastic mold, we learned interesting things about each other. What exactly is it that draws us closer to one set of buttons and triggers over another? To put it into words, it had to come from the heart. Here is Unscripted, GT's 10 favorite controllers.
Number 10.
The Wii U gamepad.
This is it.
This is this is a polarizing object.
It is, but I think there's a lot of potential in this little screen here. Not as weighted as you would imagine it to be, but it's not as light. You don't feel like it's gonna fly out of your hands.
You can hold it with one hand and then draw with the right hand.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that. It's got a camera that faces you. Symmetrical analog sticks. I like this.
Yeah.
I like having my two thumbs that usually control the person in the camera.
It's comfortable.
Being at that position. That's great. Thank you for that. Great D-pad. You know, buttons feel good to press.
Yeah.
Look at this ridge, everyone. This is where that's where these fingers go, and you can balance it better because of that weird little ridge.
Your home key. You can have your NFC.
I've used this to control my TV before. I've pressed that and just volume down. It works. It works when your remote is lost.
Number 9.
The Wii U Pro controller. Are you officially a pro the minute you pick this controller up and start playing with it?
It means you're taking your game seriously.
Well, taking it seriously is a good thing to bring up, because this is Nintendo taking their console seriously.
Right.
Realizing that, fans just like things a certain way. And this is just kind of what we prefer now, the two buttons on top.
And I mean, not just fans, game designers.
They didn't do the Xbox thing with the flipped analog sticks. They made them balanced.
Symmetrical analog sticks. And not the Sony way, they're actually the opposite of the Sony way.
More of an Xbox design than a PlayStation design, though. Definitely a little rounder.
Oh, sure. I mean, you can compare the shapes. They kind of just overlap each other. Great D-pad. The buttons are nice. Battery life is really long. I like the space you get on it, you know what I mean?
If you could use this controller to play Xbox One games, you would prefer that over the Xbox One controller.
Absolutely, yeah.
Number 8.
The Nintendo GameCube controller. I love this little guy.
One of the best controllers ever. Look at this thing.
I can't believe this isn't higher on the list. It fits perfectly. The triggers on this, they're grooved perfectly.
Look at this. There are actual grooves for Elisa's fingers
with
here.
my fingers. The analog stick.
It's got little ridges on it, so your fingers don't slip.
Yeah, and you don't blister. C-stick for the camera. You just want to pop down, move that camera around. And when I'm playing Mario Kart, I know that green's gonna mean go, red's gonna mean stop. That's all I need to know.
A is the significant button. You can tell just by looking at this controller.
The dominant button.
Yep. These, I think, are great design buttons. I like that they're different shapes. And that trigger, that's there's a little and then a kuk.
You can't replicate that.
You can't replicate that.
Playing N64 games on the Wii, perfect controller, much better than the Wii Classic controller.
Absolutely.
Just ergonomically, it's playing for a long amount of time. It's just that it's perfect for N64.
Number 7.
The Nintendo 64 controller. Lots of evil things being said about this controller at the Countdown selection meeting. I dearly love this controller. Ocarina of Time and GoldenEye are two of my favorite games of all time. I cannot imagine, even though when I picked up GoldenEye after a while, I was like, oh yeah, the C buttons to move around. I forgot about that. But why do you love this controller, Doms?
It is because this is the only way to play Super Mario 64. When they re-released it on Virtual Console, trying to play with any other controller is broken as hell. You can't play it that way. This is the only way to play 3D games. All the other controllers suck. This is the only way to play 3D games, and yeah, it also looks like a spaceship.
It looks
like it like this.
Looks like a Klingon bird of prey.
Yeah.
Rumble Pack, of course, too, which I wasn't initially into when it first came out. I didn't want to be reminded how much I sucked at games, and it was always like, you hit something.
On that Z button.
I just also want to comment about the trigger. It's we have the dual triggers now. There's something about that one, in a game, in GoldenEye, just actually firing a sniper rifle by having this whole...
So good.
Number 6.
Nintendo Entertainment System controller.
Start and select. I mean, I don't remember if any of the older controllers
It took until
had
this
those.
generation for people to stop using start and select. We just now got away from that.
I think the select button went away a little earlier, but start has always been a staple. Of all the controllers form factor, I think this is the most simplistic just a simple rectangle. Everything was kind of like on the same axis here. And having the buttons horizontal like that, I know controllers have kind of had them like a little bit off like off the 180 degree a little bit. Like, and then there's been diagonal buttons. Like Super Nintendo decided to like change them, but I feel like how close they were in their positioning, like, I don't know, for all the NES games, like this felt like perfect.
I mean, because you can roll your thumb across
Yep.
both of them. And that's the same thing. I mean, it was all about thumbs, whereas a joystick, it was your wrist. So it's actually kind of different in terms of your reaction time and all of that. This right here, the D-pad, is what started kind of a revolution.
I would say like this is like one of the best D-pads. I know people like having the individual directions separated so that you're not like hitting more than one by accident. For whatever reason, I never had issue with that. It was just such a great D-pad, and it kind of started, again, the long line of like good D-pads on Nintendo systems, or Nintendo controllers, but...
The funny thing is I remember these corners like digging into my palms, but I think that was just because I was a kid, because I hold it now and like I don't have that anything near that problem.
Yeah, and it's so light. Like, also, it's just iconic. Like how many things we see in like gaming culture now that like try and imitate that look. It's very iconic.
Absolutely.
Number 5.
Wii Motion Plus.
Plus.
Gotta add the plus.
It's a must.
The thing I always think of when I think of motion games in this controller is that whenever they make stupid commercials to try to sell motion games, and everybody looks like an idiot, you know, playing SingStar in their living room, and it's like, no one ever does that. But I did. I invited people to my house just to play bowling. We sat around and drank beer and bowled for hours. And
for a period of time, it felt like the entire world was playing video games. Every single person was playing. My grandma, my neighbors, my friends, every single person would come over and play bowling or tennis. So it just opened that door to people who were uncomfortable holding these controllers, and it just felt natural. One of the biggest things as well is sword fighting in The Legend of Zelda. Something about going into a dungeon, holding this and the nunchuck. It was like virtual reality. Just, I'll never forget that Zelda fight with Girahim, the Wii Motion Plus. Doesn't always work, but when it does, there was nothing like it.
the microphone, genius. Some games really did a lot of fun things with that. And, you know, it's one of the best controllers of all time, the NES controller. You just, whoop, you know, flip it on the side. So simple, so weird, so unconvincing when we first saw it, when it like came up out of the clay or the quicksand, you know, and like, what is that thing? It's like they've completely lost their minds, and yet we all fell in love with this thing, and it still holds up today.
Number 4.
The DualShock 2. Just the symmetry about it is really impressive, and there's not a weak aspect of this controller. The analog sticks feel good, the buttons feel good, the D-pad's great. I can play a lot of 2D games on my PS2, and the triggers feel good. You know, you have the fat R2 and L2, and the skinny R1 and L1. Like, it's a classic controller.
It's got the rumble, it's got pressure-sensitive buttons, but the triggers aren't stupid and doughy. Get these out of here.
Whether it was first-person shooters or action games, whatever it was, like every single thing felt good on the DualShock 2, and I think that's super impressive.
I played a lot of PS2 games and put a lot of time in that controller, and you're right, you never get like, oh, this is crampy.
Right.
It's like, that is
Right.
that's great, that's a great shape.
Yeah, absolutely, hundreds of hours, and I would never use anything else. Yeah, it's great.
Number 3.
Xbox 360 controller.
You love the Xbox.
I love the Xbox. I played so many damn games on this controller. It's not even funny.
Out of any controller probably on this list, I love the analog stick placement. Like my hands just sort of naturally fall to it, and it feels really, really, really good.
Which looks off when you stare at it. It's like,
right.
that can't be right.
Right, it does. It looks awkward and weird where you have the nice symmetry on the DualShock, but I think it feels better, personally. The slight convex nature of the buttons. The other controllers don't have that. A lot of buttons are just completely flat, so I think it makes pressing them feel just a tiny bit better.
It's probably the best for shooters. It's one of my FPS favorite controllers.
Definitely. Before the Xbox 360 controller, there was not a standardized gamepad for PC games, and so you pretty much played everything with a mouse and keyboard. This really made controller use on PCs a lot more popular, and almost everyone supported it, which I think is really cool and very significant.
Number 2.
The Super Nintendo controller.
One of the best.
I think it's the best.
You think it's the
I
best?
think this is the best. This is what got my vote. because it has just the right amount of buttons on it for any kind of game, especially 2D games.
Absolutely.
Because 3D games are inferior. Like once 3D gaming came around, like gaming died. So 2D gaming was like the pinnacle of video games, and has the perfect amount of buttons because it was the evolution of the NES controller.
Yep.
So it had 2 more buttons up here, so it gave you a little bit more range of controls. And then it has these 2 simple shoulder buttons. Like they're the best. They're like so, just right there,
Your
very
fingers
easy to
just
push.
naturally wrap
And then
around.
like the A and B button were the same thing as before, and they're great. When they added the X and Y, the shape of those buttons right there let you immediately know these are different buttons, but I know where they are.
The 2 things I wanted to say is how much better it felt in your hands versus the blocky NES design, and how perhaps maybe the most influential controller to me, because these 4 face buttons, think about how that permanently changed game controllers forever. And to this day, you know, the PlayStation controller, 4 face buttons, the Xbox 360 and Xbox One controller, 4 face buttons, Dreamcast, 4 face buttons. It was obvious that this was how you do face buttons.
Number 1.
The DualShock 4 controller.
This is the greatest controller in the history of all things.
I will never forget, I found out we got the PS4 in, someone came by my office, and I thought, oh, okay, I don't have time to play a game, but let me just go over and try out this guy. Ooh.
It's a sensual experience.
It is sensual. There is something sexy.
The human
about it.
hands.
I actually really like the touchpad because a lot of games just use it as a giant start button, and I love just hitting it.
There is an elegance, like this thing could be at an opera.
Yeah.
Like it just reminds
And no
me.
one would question it.
Yeah.
I like the analog sticks.
These like concave grooves in the analog sticks as well. Like much easier to just get a grip.
I like the light bar.
Green when you have a lot of health, red and flashing when you're dying.
Changes color.
And just something about the lip on the back of the R2 and the L2 was really an issue for me, that I couldn't get traction on these buttons on the PS3 controller, and it's so great.
Symmetrical analog sticks are the way, the truth, and the light.
Block, block, block. Not happening with this one. They finally like made it wider.
The trigger buttons are definitely much better. We're not supposed to say anything mean about this.
It's just gorgeous.
It's beautiful. L2 and R2.
Let me hold it.
Okay.
Look at the texture on the back of this. Just like that's a texture your fingers love feeling.
Not one of these controllers has a better curvature.
Now, if only there were games.
Yeah.
It's molded to your finger.
I mean, it's like. Can I?
Absolutely.
That's a controller.
That's a controller.
You can't beat
Would
perfection.
you say gaming died after the Super Nintendo?
I don't think it died after the Super Nintendo, but it was around the time, like, late into N64's life cycle. It's like, damn, gaming's over.
These kind of look like dicks, though.